Ladies and gentlemen, a big hello and a very warm welcome to yet another high-impact Leaders of Tomorrow eForum. Today's focus is going to be on India's credit story. Yes, there is extreme anxiety in the system, and understandably so. But as we somewhat muster the courage to slowly but steadily begin walking again, maybe it's time to reflect upon India's credit history and take a few cues from there. Is it possibly time to move beyond looking at this as a temporary hiccup that COVID-19 has posed? And there's no doubt that this pandemic has severely disrupted India's growth story. However, only temporarily, given that the underlying credit story of the Indian consumer and entrepreneurs at large is still robust. Is it time, possibly then, to change our myopic lens? Has the time come for India to accept the bitter pill of the short term and start betting on the long term in order to get the engines of the economy to start revving again? And without further ado, let me now introduce to you my illustrious panel. Welcoming Gurcharan, Economist, Vinod Kumar, President, India SME Forum, Akhil Handa, Head-Fintech Mobility and Digital Lending, Bank of Baroda, and Hardika Shah, founder and CEO of Kinara Capital. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Truly a pleasure having you on this high-impact eForum and hoping to have a very real and candid discussion. So I'm going to open it with you, Mr. Das. I want, your views on the India credit story. Yes, this has been a severe jolt to the system. We have just about not even recovered our last jolt, which is demonetization. And if we jog our memories a little, before demonetization, I mean, jolts to our economy has been quite normal. And we've even then managed to recover. In fact, if we had to look at, the credit market valuation, let's say in 2009 versus, let's say, 2019-20, that growth story itself is quite an encouraging one. Do you think, that should be the focus, and or do you have a contra view saying this issue is very different and is here to stay and hence needs completely different lenses to kind of, navigate this?
Yes, I think essentially, if we talk credit, the steps that the government has taken, and many governments have taken, is to give a stimulus via credit expansion. That was correct. And we shouldn't, a lot of people say, but we should have printed money and given people money away. Let's not fall into that trap of government spending. For government spending and infrastructure, etc., first, it takes 9 months to organize that. And by that time, hopefully the crisis will be under control. So the answer is private sector investment, and credit guarantees and all that we are giving are correct. And even to the MSME, I noticed Mr. Vinod Kumar is here. The solution, I would say, to the MSME sector is not solutions like the Mudra Bank. The solutions are the kind that Nandan Nilekani has talked about, are digital solutions to giving MSME credits on a massive scale. So let's look at the positive sides of the thing. The answer is very clear, Sonali. The answer lies in growth, growth, growth. That's the only way you'll pull the economy out, will be through growth. But before we come to how we will do it through growth, let me just say that there are some positive things that India has that many countries in the world do not have. One, we have good forex reserves. So there's very little danger of our currency going out of control, almost $500 million in forex reserve. Second, oil prices are down. Third, we have food self-sufficiency. This has been a good harvest again, and so that's not going to be an issue. Fourth, we have shown the ability to reform. we've done two big reforms in the last month. One is the agricultural reforms in the distribution of agriculture, freeing the farmer from the dreaded APMC and allowing the farmer to buy and sell anywhere that the farmer wants. And secondly, we have done an education reform. Now, I think there are some very long-term good things in that NEP. And so the government is capable of reforming. And the best time to reform is in a crisis. So they say, don't waste a crisis. We should not waste a crisis. Now, let's look at the difficulties that we are facing. The difficulty we are facing is the same difficulty we have faced for the last 10 bloody years. And that is the overhang of NPAs, the twin balance sheet problem that Arvind Subramanian, he coined. The reality is the Reserve Bank says the loans are maybe 14% of NPAs. Now, I believe that is probably double of that. So we have a very serious problem. Overhang of the financial system, we have to fix the financial system. I mean, we can't really, the solutions that have been proposed, like combining good and bad banks into consolidating them, bad ideas. You'll make the good ones go bad. The ultimate answer is to bite the bullet and privatize, and that's been talked about in Niti Aayog and in the PMO, the idea that the government should retain only 5 good banks and privatize the rest. The next answer, Sonali, is frankly, Atmanirbhar is a dangerous idea. Atmanirbhar can mean two things. It can mean self-reliance, and it can mean, which is good, or self-sufficiency. I'm afraid too many of these actions of the government are going back to the license Raj days of self-sufficiency. And this is very dangerous because, frankly, unless we lose, our export pessimism is one of the diseases for the last 50 years that we have suffered from. And no economy in the world has prospered without exports. Let's remember that. So we have to be part of the global supply chain. And if we want to be part of the global supply chain, we can't be protectionist. So we have to reverse protectionism. Now, you can handle China separately. But even with China, if it harms your possibility of exports in your global supply, don't do it. Let's import those Chinese products for making us competitive. Otherwise, we will lose out.
Fair enough. After that, before I go to Hardika and Akhil, let me take it to you, Vinod, as somebody who's got his ear very close to the ground when it comes to small businesses. While, yes, there has been lots of effort in mobilization of credit to small businesses, I'd like you to just shed some light in terms of how much of credit has actually reached, MSMEs, and in that segmentation, what are the current, problems on ground that you see? Are the monies being utilized for survival or instead of investment to just, tide them through, but, pivot and make themselves better? What is the current scenario looking at? And what about the fear factor with banks, understandably so, to lend? And I know that, the RBI, the government, all of that have worked very hard to try and mobilize as much as they can. But what is the on-ground reality in terms of, how many are able to sail through this tough period and how many are as good as comatose?
The government has done a great deal of work in trying to sort of blunt the force of this entire pandemic. But at the same time, what the government has been unable to do primarily is to reach to the smallest of the lot. So you have the micro enterprises. If you look at the basic numbers, When we talk about MSMEs, 2015, the last survey said there are 6.33 crore MSMEs. Now, if I was to just add to that figure, there are 20 crore Mudra loans which have been given after 2015. So that essentially would put us at somewhere between 26 crores to 27 crore MSMEs if you include the micro enterprises, the self-employed. If you look at, that is a major part of India. When people tell me that, MSMEs are the backbone and they are 40% contributors and so on and so forth, I say, to use parliamentary language, well, that is not the real story. MSMEs are the real economy of India. There's nothing else apart from this MSME thing. Now, if you tell me, I would say last numbers, whatever numbers you're talking about, my figures that I can sort of hold by, 10 to 12 crore MSMEs employing between 16 to 20 crore employees in India. Now, that's a huge sector. That's bigger than any other sector in India. Number one. Number two, of this, 55% of these are rural enterprises. Only 45% are urban enterprises. Now, if that is the base, when we put out the Atmanirbhar package specifically for economic support, what we've ensured is that everybody who has a loan currently is able to get money. But what about those who have no loans? Now, let me tell you some very discouraging figures on one hand. Our DG, along with SHGs from 9 states, did a small survey. And what we encountered was women being the most vulnerable section as far as entrepreneurs are concerned, are completely left out of this package. Now, if you ask me how, I'll demonstrate that. In these 9 states, there are 11 lakh women which are in professions of catering, canteens, beauty, handicrafts, who have no loans. None of them have got even a single rupee. Most of them had to shut down their businesses. On the other hand, let me tell you, MSMEs, the entire gamut of MSME is about 35–40% of MSME shutting down every year. So there's nothing new. Old ones shut down, new ones come up. That is how this entire cycle moves forward, and those that sustain, they go forward. Now, a few days back, the Honorable Prime Minister announced something called faceless income tax, the entire gamut behind, dissuading the entire personality trait in actually getting your income tax audited or reported or whatever else. I think what this country needs today is faceless banking. We need to completely take out the element of the person from our entire banking situation, because that is where everything is going wrong. Mr. Das talked about NPAs. Where are these NPAs coming from? These NPAs are coming from when there's a guy like me who goes to a banker like Akhil and says, hey, guy, I need a loan. I may not have the full authority or paperwork or whatever. Why don't we do something on the side and, please help me out and I look after you. That is the base. That is the ground reality. And in this, we've been doing this for decades and decades. So I know so many cases when politicians, leaders, across the board have intervened and got you loans. And got you loans at what? 5%, 4%? Who gives loans at 5%? But I can show you a lot of cases who have got loans at 5%. Now, when you come to the MSMEs, you'll ask MSMEs that I'll give you loans at 18%. And when it comes to NBFCs, it'll go still higher. So are we actually trying to revive the economy? Are we actually looking at the roots? Are we actually looking at the real issue? Entire India story that we are talking about today is about our demographic dividend. The entire world is at a situation where people are in scarcity around the world. India is the only country which has skilled manpower and loads of it. We have a lot of people who are trained, and we now say there are a lot of people who are actually out of jobs. But let me tell you, I know at least 100 companies which are into services, specifically human resources, which are looking at ways and means of exporting this manpower from India to all the other countries. around the world. And that is going to be one of the key things.
Let's look at what's happening from the financer point of view. What are your current challenges? Is the due diligence being done in a manner that is transparent? Are you facing deep deficiency of trust? And can you please respond to what Vinod said about the micro sector being completely not looked at all, if that is also your point of view?
One of the things we have been doing is exactly that. We give loans in the range of 3 to 4 lakhs, which is the right mix for a micro enterprise segment. But where we have suffered, and to Mr. Das's point, while there's been a lot of great policy, that policy and the capital has stopped at the bank and never made it to the NBFCs. I would like Akhil to respond to that at some point. But that capital, is trickling to us at best. And for us to then be able to get this out to the micro enterprise segment and to support them in this scenario or any scenario becomes that much more difficult if we don't have the trust of the bankers in the work we are doing. And but the one thing I will say, which is the gender issue, the women entrepreneur issue, is actually also a gender issue. The number of times women go to a bank and are asked the question, but who's really going to sign for this loan? Where's your husband or your father? And when she says that I'm the one who's come for a loan, often we don't necessarily acknowledge that or even support that. That is the precise reason why at Kinara Capital we started a Har Vikas program where we give an upfront discount for women entrepreneurs who are running and operating businesses full time. And that's an important element we need to collectively do as the ecosystem to figure out ways and means to address the women part of this problem, not just the micro enterprise part of the problem. Both need to be addressed in totality.
Fair enough. That was crisp, Hardika. But first, Akhil, you want to respond to Hardika on the fact that, there's no trust from the bankers?
I can cite a number which may help to give an understanding of our context. About 15% of our book is actually towards NBFCs of various colors, and of course, I think it's a very healthy number. We also have our internal risk limits up to which we go, and I'm not sure, if you've dealt with the bank, but I'm sure, if you come around to the bank, we can take a look at it. And I think to what Mr. Das also pointed out earlier, reforms are a continuous process, done fairly well on reforms. And if you look at just purely the digitalization and the formalization aspect of the economy, that is the single biggest factor that helps the MSMEs gain access to credit. And there has not been larger impetus to the digitalization and the formalization than has been provided in the previous 5 years. Primarily from more digitization, which leaves a digital footprint of micro and small medium entrepreneurs. And secondly, the formalization by way of them under the ambit of GST. So our job is to find out the guys who will survive and to support them to the best of our ability. Now, during the recent pandemic, I can tell you that the first port of call for everybody was survive. Then once we survive this period, this phase, then we will talk about revival. And once we're out of it, then we'll talk about thriving. So survive, revive, thrive. Now, I wanted to lay out a few things that we've done, the government has done overall for just the survive part. The first point was providing a 6-month moratorium. The second was emergency credit lines. Now, emergency credit lines have been provided with minimal documentations, no questions asked. Anybody who had access to credit was a standard account in the bank on the 29th of February will get 20% of his outstanding as credit. The third is, I talked about the standard part. At the same time, for the accounts that are NPAs, there has been a subordinate debt scheme provided by the government. Now, we operate under rules. And while we cannot provide credit to an NPA unit, we can provide credit to the promoter, right? And that promoter can infuse capital into the company. right, and revive the unit. So there have been, there has to be some level of appreciation built in of what the support has been provided for. A month back, the Honorable Prime Minister launched the Swanidhi scheme. This is street vendors access to credit. Now think about it, with all the dislocation that you've seen over the last few months, there has been disruption in business, there has been disruption in contact-led business, and there has been dislocation in terms of the street vendors probably moving back to their native places. So the Prime Minister launched a scheme to cover 50 lakh street vendors across the country with credit as small as 10,000 rupees. And this is being provided through the formal financial institutions. So banks, private, public, MFIs, cooperative banks, rural banks, everybody has been asked to pitch in wholeheartedly. This pandemic also gives us an opportunity. And I think the opportunity is very, very significant in terms of how we fundamentally re-architect the journey of going ahead of the country. There are new industries that will get established. There will be some sections of the industries which will get a great impetus. And overall, I think digitalization, where, depending upon how long this pandemic lasts, digitalization is expected to see an upfront of about 2 to 3 years. And such a process could not have happened in this kind of a short span had there not been this urgency of going ahead and doing this and serving this segment as well.
All pockets during this pandemic have been touched with. How is that liquidity flux worldwide is all pouring in? Unreliable gambling is happening within the equity market. There seems to be zero business accountancy, and there is no sync or between economy and investing. And well, businesses are collapsing. The equity market seems to suggest something completely different. How is the economy and the fifth pillar, which is the banking industry, survive as the MSME is their mainstay? How will this actually perform, going forward, given that everything is so out of sync?
Well, there is obvious mismatch, it seems. Right now, the economy is in trouble, but the markets, the equity markets are flying. Whether it's the S&P or whether it's the Nifty, exuberance on markets is never something that I ever try and figure out. So the reality is money has come back in from the foreign financial institutions back into India. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. It's a show of confidence, I think. At this time, Sonali, we need confidence at all stages. We need the confidence of the consumer to go and spend money, because no MSME is going to make any money unless somebody spends the money. So we need confidence of the manufacturers, and we need confidence of the banks, and we need confidence in the markets. So it's a good thing, frankly. It's there. Let's not grudge people who are making money at this time. But one of the achievements of this government is what we call the JAM Trinity, which is Jan-Dhan accounts, which is mobile telephony banking, and which is the Aadhaar, ability through Aadhaar to be able to identify the right person. Now, this is becoming almost universal. I would like to focus on a much more important issue. This program is about reviving the economy post-COVID. We should do all the things. I mean, look, I think we are absolutely right to focus today on surviving. Ultimately, whether it's an MSME or a big multinational company, you need demand. And demand, the legitimate form of demand, is not printing money and giving it away to people. The legitimate demand is from creating jobs. Now, we've had a problem in creating jobs for a long time. It's not a new problem. And you get jobs through growth. And frankly, the jobs come from infrastructure spending, investment in infrastructure, investment in real estate, housing. Housing is a very big creator of jobs. And export competitiveness and export. These are the very big areas where you get decent jobs. So if you want to get Achhe Din, if you want MSMEs, business revival, you've got to get people to spend the money, and they will spend the money when they have jobs. So ultimately, let's not forget it. Our first priority long term has to be productive jobs. And we should not forget that. The two key areas I want to point out, which are forgotten when we think about jobs, but there's a huge potential in those areas because they're very job intensive. One is healthcare and one is education. Nurses, people who sweep the hospital floors, all areas of healthcare, not just the pharmaceutical business, they're very, very job intensive. Now, one of the good things the government has done is this Ayushman Bharat. Ayushman Bharat is an insurance scheme. An insurance scheme that puts 5.5 lakhs in the pocket of every person. Now, 5.5 lakhs means that if I'm sick, I can go to a hospital. Now, hospitals today, we don't have enough hospitals to treat all the people who will get this 5.5 lakhs. So that demand will create supply. So what we need are hospitals to be created. Today, opening a hospital is a nightmare of license Raj. All the permissions it requires. That's what the government needs to do, ease of opening hospitals. Similarly with schools. Now, half the children in India today are in private schools. And these private schools are not elite schools. They have schools which charge 500 to 1,000 rupees a month. So these are for the masses. And again, it's very hard to open a private school. You have to pay bribe at every step. Essentiality certificate requires 5 lakhs to 50 lakhs to open a school. So decent people don't go into education. Educators, idealistic people. Only politicians, corrupt politicians, and corrupt businessmen can pay those bribes. So again, ease of opening a school will create a huge number of jobs. When we think of Make in India, we're always thinking of manufacturing. But actually, services is a very big sector of exports. And right now, frankly, exports, those are slowing down. And we should look at that. So you need to get 5-6 of the top IT companies to come work with the government and tell them that why is India's export services story slowing down? So all these are job creators, and ultimately jobs, growth is the only answer for the long term.
To bring it back to, talking about the credit story, Vinod, do you see, despite the noble, endeavors of the government, would you say that there is a sense of anxiety and fear in the entire lending system because of course, historic reasons? The fact that, we also know that this entire effort will be a shake-up for the entire MSME sector because it will be survival of the fittest and the survival of those who can pivot. The point I'm trying to bring to the fore with you is, do you see that hesitancy? And is it time to take a leap of faith just by historically looking at our credit story and saying that, yes, this is a temporary hiccup and hence, let us do most of our due diligence, but lend so that there is, some outcome to that. And we don't see 40 or 50%, fall under the bridge.
I completely agree there, Sonali. In fact, a person with no less the stature of the Prime Minister has himself talked to the bankers at various points in time and said that, don't fear somebody coming after you if you're doing the right thing. Please go out and lend. Extend your, if you remember the Prime Minister when he started the Stand Up India Yojana, it was every bank branch should give a loan to one woman and one backward class or a scheduled tribe or a scheduled caste entrepreneur. Now, a lot of bank branches were not able to find even one person, but that's the truth. But he went out there and he said that, this is what needs to be done. And my feeling is that the government today, I mean, if you look at the number of meetings that the finance ministry and DFS and every other department in the government has been trying to have with the bankers, request them, push them into, not hesitating while there is a federal guarantee that is today being offered by the central government. And thankfully, they included NBFCs also in the CGT MSME scheme, which was primarily meant to, not offer any collateral, but offer loans. But the fact of the entire thing remains that we still get a lot of complaints on a regular basis, which we then pass on to zonal managers and staff in various banks, of people not willing to even offer this CGT MSE. Because most bankers, I feel, on the other hand, are very, very cautious when it comes to lending. So that is a bigger thing.
Let me take it to you, Akhil, and take that question forward. We understand, your anxieties and your caution, and the fact that you need to dole out your money in a manner that is responsible. But is there a deep insecurity about the credit story in India amongst bankers like you?
No, I absolutely don't think so. And I think the Stand Up India scheme, was precisely brought in to give credit up to 1 crore rupees to the women entrepreneurs and certain other sections, including the SESP entrepreneurs. And the challenge was, so we set a target for at least one case per branch. But the number of cases that come to avail of such schemes is actually on the lower side. And while we keep on, we have the guns blazing down and we go to the last mile trying to find it, but it's not that that there is infinite credit demand also. Now, look, credit demand has to be juxtaposed to commercial propositions, right? And if there is commercial capital backing it, then you need a commercial proposition. Longer term, if we focus on, the commerciality of many of our industries, many of our units, that needs to get back on track. And that it will be a result of proper pricing, capacity restructuring, getting in propositions which the customers want and are willing to pay for. So the sheer ability to price your product and price it such that it makes commercial sense. Now, I for one, can guarantee you that there is absolutely no project that the bank receives which is commercial in nature, and the bank will not be willing to back it. That's absolutely not the case. Where we will hesitate is, of course, which is more suited for venture capital, which is more riskier capital, right? I mean, what do we earn? So I'll also give you a sense of what do we lend at usurious. The capital that we give under Mudra scheme to the Shishu Mudra category, which is the smallest of the entrepreneur up to 50,000 rupees, is lent today at something called as the base rate, MCLR. And that's 7.6% today in the bank, right? Now, I cannot think of any better pricing regime, given where our rate structures are. And as a result of which, I believe that, in a lot of cases, there is also there is also lack of understanding of what the potential scheme or opportunity to engage with the bank could be, which is an awareness issue. And I think we need to do a better job as a community together to be able to spread that awareness. There are many schemes, And I can also tell you that there is work being done to bring those schemes closer to the people who need them the most. So it is not an ivory tower planning. There is a continuous feedback loop that runs. There is monitoring that happens in terms of utilization. The Honorable Finance Minister, when she laid out the 3 lakh crore target for providing the emergency COVID line to the MSMEs, there is regular monitoring that happens. So, not for one, there should be any doubt in anyone's mind that, the MSMEs of the country have been left to fend for themselves. That's not the case. There is support that is being provided. There is as much support as can be provided. I talked about, certain schemes for MSMEs. When it comes to the smallest ticket sizes, it is actually, an MSME is really a sole entrepreneur, proprietor, and we have proactively gone out and given schemes for even personal loans in this period, with the singular belief that we cannot ask for the paperwork and do exhaustive due diligences, etc., from the customers at this point in time. So we are, in fact, being very, very proactive during this period.
Akhil, why don't you, or maybe Hardika, you can, but happy if you can add to the fact that our ecosystem is currently in transition, and yes, to ensure that there is more trust, the ecosystem linkages of having enablers as intervention. How is that panning out? What kind of progress have we made? And of course, it's a long journey, but it's definitely a start.
Yeah, so I want to, address something that Akhil is saying. I think we're talking about so many smaller programs that are running now, but in the vast gap of capital that is there for the micro enterprise or the MSME sector, right? We talked about 10 crore MSMEs that are hiring 120 million people, where hardly 5% have access to bank capital. So we are talking now within that 5%, these programs that are running in this period of time that are giving great support. Don't get me wrong, amazing support to a lot of people, but we are leaving out 95% who just don't have that access in the first place. So we must talk about that at some point. That is an important element of this larger, situation. The path to getting some of that is this digitalization. There is now this consent architecture that has been built that is now getting, that is getting out to the masses, as in players like us. We need to build on that. We need to make we need to make it an enabler, make it simpler, faster, so that we can get the other 95%, some or the other level of access to capital as they transition from being largely small, individuals, businesses, to maybe a registered business, or at least some identity of a business that can then go out and get access to that capital. So that is important. And lastly, I would say that, we talk about license Raj, there's banking Raj, it's all the Rajas in the world. The micro enterprises in India have seen it for a while, right? This is not new. And they still are, when we talk about survival and revival and thriving, they've figured out how to survive this for many years. So I am putting if I had to bet on the markets, that is what I'm putting my money on, is the micro enterprises, because they have figured this out. In fact, in our own customer segment, 80-90% are up and running, and they're back to 50-60% of the revenue streams, even though the moratorium is on, even though there have been lockdowns and re-lockdowns. So they're far more resilient than we perhaps or that we should give them credit for.
Right. Let me just get one question out, before I, close this session. The fact that we are now moving towards Atmanirbhar and, becoming a manufacturing hub of sorts, the question is, competing with Chinese costs of doing business is very, very high in India, and there is multiplicity of government charges. How does one compete with that?
Well, I really think this is a great question for Mr. Das. I'll give you a perspective from my business customers, and I would say that the biggest challenge for them has been the access to or getting raw materials, because a lot of the raw materials are coming from China. So for them to stay competitive, they need the lower cost materials to be able to do something with. And Vinod was saying, we all love a deal. So unless all of us are willing to spend more and willing to pay full price for quality, that for India, for vocal for local and buying Indian, it's a tough nut to crack for us in the short term.
Yeah. Mr. Das?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Hardika has said on China. I think we lost this opportunity for the last 10 years. As China's economy became uncompetitive, the wages went up. A lot of countries got the benefit of the Chinese jobs, Indonesia, Vietnam,
Vietnam.
primarily, Bangladesh, etc. We did not. And the answer to India is not to ban Chinese goods in areas in crucial. You can ban Ganesh idols and all that, thalis, chamchas. But what I'm saying is that the answer is to become competitive ourselves, which means being able to acquire land in a sensible way than it is today, when titles are not secure. You need 250 people to sign to get 1 acre of land. The the issue of, as I mentioned, electricity. Our electricity rates are double of that of China. Now, why? Because we give free power to farmers, and the industry has to pay for that. And so we have to have proper markets operating in the electricity area rather than these state electricity board monopolies of the government. So there are all these reforms which are going to improve the life of the MSME far more. So basically get rid of the license Raj out of the hair of the entrepreneur, of the MSME. And one of the worst enemies of the MSME is the labor inspector, expect to be paid a bribe every month or every week. The logistics of moving, your freight. The freight costs in India are very high because we subsidize passenger fares through high freight costs. So nobody uses the railways. And you use trucks when in the rest of the world they're using railway freight, which is much cheaper. So all these are the really, and this is the crisis because reforms don't happen except in a crisis.
It's clear that the road to revival is a long and arduous one. But having said that, I think we will also become more robust as a country, more productive, and this is going to be an opportunity of sorts. Hopefully, that will take us to the next year. On that note, thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Truly a pleasure. We'll be back next week with a new conversation, a new topic. On that note, thank you.